Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com. We are coming back at y'all today. Similar video to what we did last week. We were taking a look at the Texas basketball roster. We've gotten some news since the last video we did, and I think I posted around 5 or 6 days ago at this point. Tyrese Hunter announced he's returning for next season, which drew his name from the 2023 NBA draft. His return now brings Texas to 8 scholarship players on the current projected roster for next season. I think Tyrese Hunter returning kind of locks down that starting spot at the 2. And it's just nice to have that like stability back on the roster, bringing back 2 starters at least, considering the amount of other attrition around the roster. That'll be nice to have. But yeah, we got some other portal movement that we're going to talk about in this video and kind of break down some of the top priorities, because even since the last video, I think there's 3 new portal targets out there for the Longhorns. Rodney Terry still looking to add like 2 more guys before the start of next season. We still got some grad transfers that could pop in. For those that are unaware, the portal closed for underclassmen that would be immediately eligible for next season. That closed on May 11th. So everything from here on out, any new entrants would more broadly be grad transfers. Could still happen though. So Shane, what are some of your thoughts mainly about
last video we kind of had Tyrese Hunter penciled in as coming back, but for that to officially happen, I think is great news. You mentioned kind of the continuity of it, and that really can't be understated. We saw Chris Beard in his first year with Texas sign an insane transfer class with the talent and the depth. And that turned into one NCAA tournament win, but, not really what Texas is going for. And I think that's, the case in today's day and age of college basketball. You need to bring in transfers and supplement your roster with talented transfer guys. But if you completely build through the portal, I think there's going to be an issue, at least in the first year. We saw it once Texas had those guys in the second year, like Marcus Carr, like a Timmy Allen, like Dylan Dessou. They really started to gel more. But that first year was a little shaky. And so I'm glad to get Hunter back in the room. He's going to be really comfortable. I think he's going to be one of, if not the leader on this team. And pairing him with Max Asmus forms one of the more formidable backcourts in not only the Big 12, but the entire country. So in what is a guard-driven sport, it's going to do Texas a lot of good to have those 2 guys back there. A lot of close games in the Big 12. You need guys who can knock down shots, create their own shot, are comfortable going to the free throw line in late game situations. And that's something that those 2 guys both possess. So I think the Tyrese Hunter coming back, like I mentioned, we kind of penciled it in, but to officially have that is great news. And Coach Terry, if they get a few names here to round out that roster, could potentially be a top 10 team going into the 23-24 season. It just kind of matters how that breaks, because we do know there is going to be at least 1 or 2 more ads here. It's just how high quality are those guys? Are they immediate contributors? Are they more kind of 3rd, 4th, 5th guys off the bench?
Yeah, you bring up some interesting points there. Like, actually, one thing that I didn't really think about, obviously, like I've thought about like the roster attrition, what losing some of these guys, whether it be to the portal or to the NBA draft or just due to a lack of eligibility, will do to Texas next season. And, I'm thinking like when Texas is adding some of these portal guys, how much of an impact do you think it could have on the team next year? Let's say you add a guy like, we'll get into this name a little bit more later, but Tyrin Lawrence, the Vanderbilt transfer, he's a former teammate of Dylan Dessou, so they played together before. Do you think that chemistry is like, am I overthinking this too much, or is that chemistry something that could, build something at Texas as well?
I think it definitely matters. In that case, I believe Lawrence and Dessou only played 1 season together, and it was Lawrence's freshman year, where he didn't see a ton of action. So maybe in that specific case, not as much, but I do think continuity matters, and them just even being familiar with each other goes a long way. You saw in Chris Beard in year 1, just to get those, 8, 9 transfers to even kind of form together a bond as a team. That's tough. And that takes a lot of work in the offseason. So for Lawrence to at least have a familiar face in Austin, even if they didn't spend a ton of time on court together, I think that is something to factor into play. And I think probably will factor somewhat into his decision as well.
Yeah, and I just use that as one example of some level of familiarity, whether it be between the coaching staff and the team, or between the chemistry of teammates themselves. Like, so I think that's one aspect to look, or one way to look at it. But another thing here is that we already added Tyrese Hunter, the UTEP transfer. I think it helps obviously that Rodney Terry, I believe, coached him for a year at UTEP. And so, like, there's a certain level of familiarity there that will help Rodney Terry know where to put Onyemna, know where to put him in the best position to succeed right away. And, there's, again, other transfers we'll talk about here that, whether they were offered by Terry or, played for him, whatever that be, that I think that familiarity will definitely help as well. I think Terry's been pretty smart with the way he's kind of picked some of the transfer targets so far. Onyemna being one of those guys included. Part of my optimism so far, in every article I've done breaking down a new transfer target or a portal commitment, I still got half the series to go breaking down portal commits for the YouTube channel. But I think part of my optimism is founded by Texas being able to find some pieces that are really intriguing to, build a team at least with a high floor. I don't know the ceiling yet, but the floor looks decent enough right now to where if they add two more solid portal guys, that I'll feel good about the team heading into next season. That said, let's kind of revert back a little bit before we get into talking about the portal targets. For people that might not have seen the last video, or just to update what the roster looks like for me. I'm not going to do a screen share like last time. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on this, but right now I've got Max Asmus starting at the 1, Hunter at the 2. You mentioned that earlier. The wing, I think, is still the biggest question mark in the starting 5. Kendall Weaver, I think we've talked about the potential of a 3-guard lineup. I think you could do that. Brock Cunningham could technically start at the 3 as well. At the 4, Dylan Dessou, Caden Shedrick at the 5, and then on the bench, I've got Brock Cunningham as the 6th man, and then also Tyrese Hunter and Alexander Mikwe. So, like I said, 8 scholarship guys right now. Let me pose this question to you. I think this serves as a good bridge to get into talk about more of the portal needs, and then we can talk about some of the portal priorities. I'll just pose this question to you straight up. Like, do you think that whoever is starting at the 3 is on the roster starting at the 3 on the opener for next season? Is he on the roster right now, or are we still going to pick that guy up?
So I hope not, because I do believe there are there are some wing targets that would fit that role better. Kind of like a slasher, hard-nosed defender type of player that can play with the ball in his hands, but also plays well off the ball. Does a lot of the gritty work, but is a little more of an offensive threat than Brock Cunningham, and is a little bigger than Weaver. So there are a couple names that I'm looking at that I think could fill that role perfectly. And if that does happen, I think that sets his Texas roster up perfectly, because you have that starting 5, and then you have Weaver and Cunningham as your 6th and 7th man. Expecting Weaver to do something like Sir'Jabari Rice did last season is a little foolish, but I think he can kind of play that role of the 3rd guard, and you can roll with that 3-guard lineup throughout games. And then Cunningham, of course, what you're going to get with him. So if we're able to push Cunningham and Weaver onto the bench, I think that means that Texas found a really good player in the portal. So that'd be a good sign.
The second question I had was at the 4. I know that both you and I have questions about the fit between Dessou and Shedrick, that we don't need to spend too long talking about that. But I think that a lot of Texas fans need to be realistic about the lack of floor spacing that's going to present, just as a basketball problem, not as a bias toward any one player, because I like both of their games individually. If we land a solid forward, let's say an Arthur Kaluma type, and we also potentially add a wing. Do you think that we could be in a spot where, or do you think it's even possible to have either Dessou or Shedrick coming off the bench to start a game?
So I think Dessou is probably in the starting lineup. Not probably. I think Dessou is in the starting lineup regardless of who Texas adds. But with Shedrick, I do think it's interesting because personally, I like to fit with Dessou, regardless who's on the court, at the 5. I like Dessou playing the center position. That said, under this current roster construction, Dessou would be the starting 4 and Shedrick would be the 5. I don't think there's any question there. I do like your point. I mean, it's a valid question. I don't think Rodney Terry went out there and made any promises like, hey, you're going to be a starter, Caden Shedrick. So I think that's a good thing. And I do think regardless of who ends up starting, it's more important how the minutes are stacked. And I think regardless of who ends up filling out this roster, you're not going to see more than 10 minutes a game of Dessou and Shedrick on the court at the same time. So if, they do start together, if that's just how it looks, I think that's fine. But from what I've seen from Dessou, I don't want him guarding the modern day 4. At the NBA level, he could be a modern day 4. I just don't think he's fleet of foot enough to stay in front of those guys, and it doesn't create enough good matchup problems, or not. Didn't phrase that correctly. It doesn't give you enough matchup advantages on the offensive side of the ball from what you're going to lose on the defensive side of the ball with those two, because having Dessou play out on the perimeter, I think you're going to get cooked a lot of the time, and that's just more pick and rolls and more screens that those guys are going to be put into. So personally, I think regardless of who ends up filling out this roster, they're not going to spend a lot of on-court time together. But it could definitely affect the starting lineup depending who Texas adds going forward.
Let's say that we end up playing a team that has a bunch of good slashing guards, maybe a slashing wing. If we're having trouble switching defenders because let's say we don't have the length at the 3 to be able to defend a true wing, that is probably going to end up being foul trouble that then gets turned over to Dessou and Shedrick. Even if we're starting them both, like you said, for a couple minutes at a time, that can still put us in a spot where we're getting both of our best bigs in foul trouble early on. So that sets the wrong tone. So even from that perspective, I could see that being an issue. But anyway, I digress. We don't need to go deep into that.
I think on the half glass full side of that, you could take it this either way, but it's like those guys are going to get in foul trouble a decent amount. So you're already going to be able to naturally stack their minutes, because it's like, oh, Dessou picked up a quick 2 fouls 10 minutes in, so he's on the bench for the rest of the half. And, then you don't have to worry about them playing together. So
you're almost looking at it as an excuse instead of a word.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, that's kind of my spin zone on that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Let's transition the conversation now to portal needs. Obviously we've touched on it here and there. For me, I have one broad and then one specific need that I'll name. Broadly, I think we need more bench depth. And I think that there's a number of ways you could tackle that, but whether it be adding more guys that are starting caliber players, and that means pushing some of the current guys that might be projected starters to the bench, fine. Or if that means adding, a quality 6th or 7th man to the rotation, with another portal pickup, that's fine too. And Texas had the best bench in the Big 12 last season, one of the best scoring benches in the entire country. And that was one of the big reasons why they made it as far as they did in the postseason. And so I know that a lot of that was because of Christian Bishop and Serge Barry Rice, but that would be overlooking some quality performances from a guy like Brock Cunningham, where he was coming off the bench and providing a huge spark on both ends too. So something to take into account. I think we need 4 guys off the bench that can all be quality contributors. That's going to be my broad need. More specifically, I think we got to add a guy that can play at the 3. We got to add a starting caliber wing. That's going to be my 2.
Yeah, I think it's important Texas adds someone who can play with the ball in their hands and who can score. Like if you look at say for all intents and purposes, Weaver starts at the 3 on this current roster, and you have Cunningham, Anamikwe, and Onyemna off the bench. Those are all guys who are like, if they get double digits in a game, like that's wow, like they're doing something. They're doing something well. So I think you need to add someone who you're not shocked when that happens. Someone. I mean, we don't even really need the 3-point shooting. More just can they get to the rim? Are they willing to take the basketball and say like, I'm gonna go get a bucket? Almost like Timmy Allen. Like Timmy Allen would be perfect on this team.
Are you saying you want a Caleb Love type player?
And see, this is where the debate comes in, because I absolutely, no disdain for the person Caleb Love, but his game, I am not a fan of Caleb Love in the basketball sense.
Yeah, we'll digress for now on the Caleb Love conversation.
Yeah,
I get what you're saying. Do you have anything else on the portal needs? I know you mentioned so.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned 3. I think if it's important that Texas gets someone that they can start at the 3. I think that would do wonders to allowing Weaver and Cunningham to come off the bench. I think that's the best roster setup we can possibly hope for.
Let's go ahead and start here. I guess the Caleb Love conversation serves as a good transition. So the two true guards that I have as portal priorities for Texas right now are both UNC transfers. There's Caleb Love, who is, one of the more polarizing players in the portal right now, because initially he entered the portal. I think that was like a couple months ago at this point, almost about 6 weeks ago, and about 5 weeks ago he committed to Michigan. And then, was it earlier this week, decommitted, looks like problems with issues with admissions there. I'd have to pull up the Matt Norlander report. There was a lot of stuff, something with credits that didn't transfer over correctly as a grad transfer that didn't mesh well with Michigan. Now, do I think that's like the biggest academic issue where, that would cause him to not be a fit at Texas? I don't think so. I think if Texas didn't take Caleb Love, it would be because someone was pursuing him harder, or because Terry decided that there was a better fit with another portal target. The other transfer target among true guards is, like I said, another UNC guy, DeMarco Dunn. Dunn didn't play much at UNC. I believe he only scored in the double digits once in the last 2 seasons that he was there. I think he's a sophomore. I think he played 2 years there. Former 4-star recruit. The connection there is that Rodney Terry was actually the first coach to give DeMarco Dunn an FBS offer, or a Division I offer. Division I offer a few years ago when he was the head coach at UTEP, and so obviously bought into his game a while ago. I mean, Dunn hasn't lived up to the billing yet as kind of a top 75 rated 4-star recruit. So that said, he was brought in under Roy Williams. Then you had the coaching transition. I am losing UNC's head coach. The name of their head coach
Hubert
right now.
Davis.
Hubert Davis. Yeah, and so I mean that hasn't been the smoothest transition in certain respects. But also there's a number of blue chip recruits at UNC. They bring in a handful of blue chip recruits every cycle. So, multiple reasons why he was probably limited playing time there, but he would be a depth guard, I think, if we brought him in, and there'd probably be some tweaks that Terry would try to make. I dove really deep into his game, though. He could be a decent off-ball shooter. He's got a natural shooting stroke. He can be a decent defender at the 1 or the 2. Also a guy that Terry would try to bring into the fold and, refine his game. Probably find some of the potential he saw in him coming out of high school. Anyway.
So you mentioned the term depth guard, and I think that's kind of what Texas needs here, which is why I'm not opposed to Dunn. I think Dunn would be an interesting add. He's not someone that I'm like banging the table for, but if he did end up in Austin, I think he's someone that, Terry could develop. And I do like adding players that have multiple years of eligibility, just so they can kind of, see what the coaching staff can do with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as a depth guard, he would be interesting. You gave your take on Caleb Love earlier, so I get it if it ends up that the last glaring need, because yeah, I mean we do need a ball handler to come off the bench. First of all, if Caleb Love's willing to come off the bench and like if that's the role he's promised, I'd be shocked if that was his first option to come to Texas and be a scoring guard off the bench. But if he does, great. Um, Among the guards and like the kind of guard wing guys that could play at the 2 or the 3, there's two names. At the top of the board, I think is Vanderbilt transfer junior Tyrin Lawrence. Brief background on him. He former teammate of Dylan D'Souza for one season. I touched on that earlier. You mentioned the name. He's a good off-ball player on both ends of the floor. He led the SEC actually, I think he led all SEC players. Yeah, he did. On points per possession on cutting plays last season. So he's very good working off screens, cutting to the basket, things like that. But he's also a good off-ball scorer. Shot 36% from deep last season. You can put him in the corners from the elbow. He's good from those spots. Very good defender as well. He can defend really anywhere between the 1 and the 4. He's about 6'4", 6'5", good wingspan, pretty good athlete. So I wouldn't mind him as a portal addition. And then the flashy target right now is Cam Spencer, Rutgers transfer. A guy that does a lot of things well. Averaged more than 13 points per game last season, shot better than 43% from deep. Also a good defender. I think one stat that I found that sums up the impact he has on a team really well is that his offensive box plus minus and defensive box plus minus were both above 5 at Rutgers last season. That is a rare combination statistic to find. That shows that he not only is having a consistent impact on both ends of the floor in terms of just helping a team win games, but that there aren't many faults in his game. To be able to post that stat, you got to be pretty strong in each statistical area. And yeah, I just don't know. I think a lot of his transfer from Rutgers had to do with NIL stuff. So, I think Texas is going to go after him. I don't know where Texas stands in the pecking order right now.
I think if Texas was able to land either of these guys, that would be huge. I think they are exactly what the Longhorns need. So they both stand at 6'4". So unfortunately, not kind of your ideal size for a starting 3. But like you mentioned, their prowess on both sides of the ball is well documented. Cam Spencer has done it at 2 different schools over 4 years. So if I had to pick between the 2, I think I'd prefer Spencer. But I think if Texas is able to land either of these guys, that's a major well done to Rodney Terry. And I think these are the type of players that can move Texas into that category of Final Four contender going into next year. Because, at this point, with if you add either of these guys, you have so much 3-point shooting that it's going to be hard to defend this team on offense. They're going to space you out, and they're going to have many, many weapons. So probably going to be a lot of people that want that. But if you were able to get him in Austin, I think perfect fit and, a really big part of this team next season.
Let me move on here to the forwards. I think that's where the conversation gets real interesting because the 2 forward targets that Texas is going after in the portal right now are both guys that will definitely impact the team in a positive sense. But I think it definitely changes the way that you would look at the rest of the big board for portal priorities. If you land either of these guys, you have Tennessee transfer Julian Phillips, freshman, all conference caliber player. Then you have Arthur Kaluma, the Creighton transfer that sounds like he's down to really Texas and Arizona at this point. Arizona's probably the favorite. I know that it sounds like, okay, well, maybe because I think Julian Phillips has like 3 or 4 schools still in mind for him. I think a lot will depend on if he can actually get an SEC waiver, which doesn't sound great right now, but he might. I haven't ruled out that possibility yet. I think Kaluma is not a lock to Arizona, but I'd put it like at 75% chance right now. And Phillips, I don't know. I think it's still too early in the portal recruitment to really say. What are your feelings about both players, though?
Yeah, I think both would be terrific ads. I mentioned on Twitter, I think Arthur Kaluma would be perfect for this team. I think he can play the three. I also think he can play the four. He doesn't shoot that great from deep, but that's not really what Texas needs at the moment. They need someone who's comfortable slashing to the rim, will make his free throws when he gets there. Both players do that well. And really strong offensive rebounders and can guard on the other side of the floor. So I think both of these guys, my preference would be Kaluma over Phillips, but I don't think there's a ton splitting. I think you're splitting hairs between the two, honestly. They have pretty similar style of games. Kaluma's just 1 year older, but I think it would be a perfect fit. I think you could have a lot of lineup versatility with Phillips or Kaluma, like I said, because you can play him at the three and you can play him at the four. If you play him at the three, you're running some big lineups out there, which, I mean, would be interesting to see and try. We mentioned the Shedrick Disu conversation earlier. If you threw one of these guys at the three with them, that would be interesting to see. But I think regardless, they'd find their way on the floor a lot, and they just make winning basketball plays. We saw Kaluma in the tournament with Creighton. He's just a winning player, and yeah, I think I think if as Texas fans we could pick here, it'd be you get one of Julian Phillips and Arthur Kaluma and one of Cam Spencer and Tyrin Lawrence, and you are a top 5 to 10 team in the country going into next season.
I also think another realistic scenario is where we get Tyrin Lawrence and then Caleb Love, and then we're kind of locked in with the front court we have right now. I think that's very much a possibility. But yeah, best case scenario, I think, is kind of what we're saying right now, because then you get the best of all worlds, where you can add a little bit to the front court, a little bit of like what is left that is needed. The wing rotation looks better. It's more switchable. It's more versatile. Guard rounded out, and all around bench depth looks good.
Yeah. I know. I think, I mean, it's exciting. Like I said, regardless of who Texas adds going forward, it's a pretty strong roster with the 8 scholarship guys we got right now. And shout out Gavin Perryman there too.
Yeah.
He gets included, walk on, but
he played a role in helping to get. I think he played a role in helping to get Asmus to.
No, did he?
Because I thought they were. Am I getting? I always get Gavin Perryman mixed up, but I think. Keep going with your point, but.
Yeah, I mean, no, I just think that regardless of what happens, Rodney Terry's built a pretty strong roster through the portal, and there's going to be a name or two that rounds this roster out. It could take the ceiling from a top 15 team to a top 5 team. So I think that's just the point where we're at right now, and I think that's a good spot to be in for Texas basketball.
Absolutely. Yeah, Gavin Perryman was a teammate of Asmus's for 1 or 2 years at Dallas Jesuit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I know we spent some time with him during Asmus's visit, so I believe they are still friends. But I think this point in the portal this offseason is kind of what makes the difference between Texas maybe being like they are right now, maybe like a top 20 type team, like fringe top 20, to, like you said, solidified top 15 or top 10 team. And, where you could really get this team primed to make another deep postseason run. So anyway, for Andrew Miller, Shane Black, Hook'emHeadlines.com, that's pretty much it. Welcome.